Hello, welcome. This is the second episode in our series, The Science of Effective Prevention. Our first episode, we talked about the economics of addiction and the industry of addiction. Lots of new information. And today we're going on and we're going to talk primarily on the costs. What are the costs to society of this industry of addiction, which is operating in our society, and how does it impact our efforts at effective prevention? So the cost to society that are spent treating the disease of addiction drain our community resources, and as a result, our efforts of prevention don't have as many resources as they otherwise would, and they suffer, and that's unfortunate. So we do know from Iceland that if we invest in resources, if we invest our resources into prevention, that we can essentially eliminate the epidemic of addiction. We can turn the battleship. And this is such profound information. So in Iceland, they had the worst levels of alcohol and drug abuse. And at the end of 10 years, they had changed from the worst place to the best place in all of Europe. They ended up closing 4 out of 6 rehabs, and they invested in their whole science of prevention and their prevention model. And they also were able to control their industry in a way that was helpful for society, and we're going to look at that right now. Now, there's some myths that the industry would not like you to be aware of. And the first is there's nothing we can do about addiction rates, that essentially 10% of the population is going to be an addict no matter what you do. And they say that, there's nothing we can do about the levels of addiction because it's really dependent on someone's genes. If they're destined to be an addict, because of their genes, they're going to be one, and there's nothing we can do. And therefore, we need to focus our efforts on, prevention, on treatment of people who are suffering, rather than on societal changes in the environment that encompass really prevention, the science of prevention. So what we learn from Iceland is that we look at this model and we see over 20 years that the genetics in Iceland have not changed. So they didn't have a gene pool shift that magically all of a sudden made it so that 10% of the population, that the percentage of people who are suffering from addiction changed. What they changed was the money and resources that they put into prevention efforts, and that decreased their rates of addiction in their society. The other thing that people in Iceland are quick to say is that Iceland has high rates of single-parent homes. They work long hours outside the home. They have lots of use of anti-anxiety psychiatric drugs. They have high screen times. So all of these, they're not unique. High mortgage rates, high credit card debts. So it's not some sort of ideal society, but they were able to invest in prevention and make a profound difference. So that's cause for a lot of hope. So now we'll just review some of the central premises that we talked about on the first program. And we talked a lot about this quote from the RAND report of Bo Kilmer's. The daily and near daily users account for 80% of alcohol and drug expenditures. And in order to create a profit, these companies are expected to focus on creating and maintaining these heavy users. Dependence is good for the bottom line. So again, this is quite a devastating concept that we are enabling an industry which its widget that it's producing is actually someone who has a substance abuse disorder. And so that's really a new concept for a lot of Vermonters when they hear it. We had no idea that this was happening, that they don't make any profit unless they create heavy users. So that's important information. And then the second part of the quote is also important. Our free speech doctrine makes it very difficult to restrict advertising and marketing, and we've seen that play out in the marketplace. And when we legalize an industry, when we give them personhood and legitimacy, then we give them certain rights, and those rights make it very difficult to control advertising and marketing to children, and producing modifications of their product which are more dangerous, more addictive than they would otherwise be. So there's the slide on showing that the taxes are not able to keep up with the costs of addiction. And the next slide shows, so the next slide that you're looking at there is a representation of the river is on fire, and all of a sudden people pay attention that they're taking care of the costs while the industry is going away with the profits. And then the next slide is the representation of the small amount of taxes that we are able to actually collect, but the costs to society are 10 times that. So we see we have historical data on alcohol and tobacco, and today we're going to take a deep dive into marijuana, but the principles are the same for all the different substances. And then the next slide. So what are the costs to society? Today we'll explore the cost of one drug, marijuana, and compare those costs to society to the taxes that society is able to collect from the industry's earned profit. And can taxes be collected to mitigate the damage the industry creates as they create and maintain heavy users in their efforts to secure industry profit? And the very last part of our program will really look deeply at what of the human suffering. You know, there's the cost and monetary, but what of the human suffering? And then our last slide. So this talk is going to talk primarily about the healthcare costs, but we also have a lot of other costs. And if you just take marijuana, for example, we have chronic school children absenteeism. We have the workforce-related costs. We have child abuse and neglect costs. We have congenital defects, which are of children born to mothers exposed to marijuana, and those costs. We have increased costs of auto insurance. In Colorado, it's gone up approximately $40 per driver, and if we had that much costs in Vermont, that would be an extra $20 million that Vermonters would have to spend on industry. So all those costs are there as well, but we're this hour going to primarily focus on healthcare costs. And so with that introduction, we're going to move to Dave Evans, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about what he's learned about the costs from marijuana, commercialization of marijuana, primarily I think in Colorado. Dave, are you with us today?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Welcome. It's nice to have you back again. So what can you tell me about what you've learned about the costs of commercialization of marijuana in Colorado?
Well, I've been studying this for several years, and especially this last year when all of the data has been coming out about Colorado and marijuana legalization. And what has happened to our country is that we have an industry that is pretty much unrestrained right now by anybody, and they're getting away with murder, and they're following the playbook of the tobacco and the opiate industry, where they're using a lot of money to promote their product and trying to convince people that it's not dangerous or addictive. Also, the marijuana of today is far different from the marijuana that I smoked back in the 1960s when I was in college. Back then it was about 2 or 3% THC. Now the products are 99%, 85% THC. It's a completely different drug than it was back then. So let's just take a look at what's been happening to Colorado. Colorado has been portrayed by the marijuana industry as sort of the paradise of pot, that they're doing everything great, and that it's done nothing but benefit everybody. I am concerned about young people. The recent data from Colorado shows that when you look at the suicides of young people from the ages of 10 to 19, when they look at, they do a toxicology report on their bodies, marijuana is the number one drug by far that they are under the influence of at the time they commit their suicide. In Colorado now, sad to say that 1 in 6 infants and toddlers who are hospitalized for lung inflammation are testing positive for marijuana. In other words, they're getting it from their parents through secondhand smoke. That's 1 out of every 6 kids that's hospitalized for this. Marijuana-related emergency room visits by Colorado teams is substantially on the rise, particularly kids showing psychotic symptoms and other mental health problems caused by marijuana. There is a condition called cannabis, I think it's called hyperemesis, which is uncontrolled vomiting from marijuana. And when these people are told that it is marijuana that's causing it, they get angry. And they disagree with the doctor and say the doctor is stupid. We're seeing in Colorado also low birth weights. There has been a 50% increase in low birth weights among women who have used marijuana during pregnancy. Now, this is a terrible thing to visit upon children because it sets the stage for future health problems, including infections, time spent in neonatal intensive care, all of which is hugely expensive. The marijuana industry is not paying for this. We are. We've also seen a general increase in emergency room visits and hospitalizations related to acute marijuana intoxication. As you know, going to the emergency room is very, very expensive. The other problem that we see, which is something that is starting to manifest itself, is that marijuana products have a very high rate of contamination with pesticides, heavy metals, marijuana grow chemicals, and so forth. There have been several studies done in California. Virtually the overwhelming majority of products in California are contaminated with pesticides, and there have been problems in Colorado also with this. Even the states that are, in quotes, regulated, have a regulated marijuana industry, are having a trouble with this contamination. It's happened in Washington, California, in Colorado, and in Massachusetts. Massachusetts just closed down a facility because of contamination with pesticides. The biggest damage that we see, and the long-term damage that is going to be visited upon our society for generations, is the impairing of fetal development caused by fetal neurodevelopment caused by both parental and maternal marijuana use. This causes developmental and hyperactivity disorders in children, learning deficits, gaps in problem-solving skills and memory, increased likelihood that the young person will become addicted to other drugs, decreased motor development, birth defects, and childhood cancer. The pediatricians and gynecologists have issued a very stern warning about this. The American Psychiatric Association has also issued a stern warning. The U.S. Surgeon General, the American Academy of Sciences, all have said, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, all have said that there's a problem with using marijuana during pregnancy and that it causes mental illness. So the marijuana industry is not paying for this. And the problem with taxing the marijuana industry for all of these problems is that if you make the cost of marijuana so high, people will stop buying it at the realtor stores and just go back to their local drug pusher. It is very easy to manufacture marijuana, and where it's harder to manufacture tobacco and alcohol and opiates. And that's precisely what's happening in Colorado. The black market is thriving there, and the tax money is not anywhere near paying for all the damage. So the marijuana industry is getting rich. The money is coming out of your pocket, even though you are not a marijuana consumer.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the arguments for legalization means we're going to get tax money, hasn't really held up, and that we're going to have better quality pot also hasn't really panned out in terms of the legal states have worse quality marijuana than ones that haven't even legalized. So all sort of counterintuitive.
But the big argument is, well, if we tax and regulate it, we'll take it out of the way to the black market. That is not happening. And the other problem is that when you legalize marijuana, it's not just somebody sitting alone on a Saturday night at home smoking a joint. When you legalize it, you also permit the commercialization of it. And the commercialization means that the investors want to make money, and they want to expand their market share. They want to hook kids in when they're young, just like the tobacco industry did with those Joe Camel advertisements. They want early on so that they've got a reliable market. They have absolutely no interest in being responsible and trying to get people not to use the substance.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much, Dave Evans. That's a lot of information in a short period of time. We've got a lot of the other guests lined up today, and I'll let you go with that. But thank you very much for joining us.